Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Breer, and welcome to episode 53 of the 11FS FinTech Insider Break Show. In this show, we bring you the best and the brightest from around the fintech and banking landscape every single weekday, straight into your homes at 8:30 BST, here live on LinkedIn. I mean, I think I should at this stage almost make that a sing-along for everybody watching, I reckon. I think you guys could probably deliver that as well as I can. So today, though, I am thrilled to be joined by Dan Morgan, who is the European Policy Lead at Plaid. This morning, what we're going to be doing is talking about the future of open finance and hearing a little bit more about the insights uncovered from the new joint report between Plaid and 11FS. So without further ado, good morning, Dan. How's it going?
Good morning, David. Great to be here. Very well, thank you. Very well.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty, I mean, looking at the comments on LinkedIn, everybody has the same weather right now. It's a pretty grey looking Friday, isn't it? But
it's amazing how quickly it changes.
It is. It's, I mean, you know, social distancing, ain't nobody going outside today, are they? It's absolutely chucking it down. But I mean, Dan, can we start a little bit by giving a bit of an introduction to yourself, a bit about your background, because you've had a fascinating career in terms of the places you've been, and obviously the great work that you're doing at Plaid now.
Sure. So yeah, as you said, I'm the policy lead at Plaid. What does that mean? Managing relationships with governments and regulators and policymakers as part of our pan-European sort of go-to-market efforts. Been here 6 months and so been pretty busy despite COVID as we continue to expand. I spend most of my time advocating for a regulatory environment which allows sort of open digital financial services to grow, and I've been doing that for a while. Prior to Plaid, I was Ripple's European policy lead as well, led the regulatory team. But we've probably got most connections at the time. I was back at Innovate Finance in the early days and Level 39 when you guys were starting out.
When we were neighbours, weren't we? Yeah.
We were neighbours, yeah. So I remember you guys starting out. So spent a few years there in the sort of around 2014 onwards as the sort of fintech scene was just starting to bubble up here in the UK. So Plaid, I mean, you probably know, I heard you talk about Plaid a few times on the show, but we're a US company launched in 2012, and we came to Europe in 2019, and we build the infrastructure which power digital financial services. So it really ties into what I'm talking about with governments. So yeah, and we're looking to continue to grow across Europe.
Fantastic. I mean, Plaid's European expansion has just gone from strength to strength to strength. You know, it feels like you guys have really hit the scene really quickly, especially in the context of, you know, so many players in this space. Then, I mean, brand and actually positioning and actually just in terms of how you engage with the community, it makes such a big difference. But loads and loads of people joining us this morning, so there'll be lots of good questions. I mean, as always, guys, please, if you drop questions over on LinkedIn, what we'll do is we'll weave them into the conversation as we go. But I could already kind of see there's unfortunately a lot of moaning about the weather. Can't do anything about that, guys. All right, I can do a lot, but can't do anything about the weather. But yeah, good morning, Cameron over in Wales, from Oliver up in Yorkshire. We've got people in here from India, from over down in South Africa, gloomy Surrey, unfortunately. Sorry again, can't do anything about that. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Get involved in the conversation. And if you've got any questions for Dan on Plaid or the report as we go, drop them in. So Dan, you guys have with us, so Adam Davies at 11FS, but yourself and Kat Cloud from Plaid have just released a joint report. Can you tell us a little bit about the context behind the report and how it came about in the first place?
Sure. So I suppose the immediate context is that the FCA have a call for input on open finance. And this was a good time to explore how we might get there, what it might look like, what the impact might be on different companies and the opportunities might be. The broader context, I suppose, is that it's not just the FCA looking at this. I know the Commission as well is looking at how they move on from PSD2, and there are concepts around open finance as well in Europe, and stuff going on in Australia, which looks at this as well as parts of Asia. So there's a global movement starting to look at, what we mean by open finance. So I think that was a good time to start to think about it.
Yeah.
Um,
And I guess specifically on that, because obviously, I mean, open banking and open finance, sometimes people sort of use these things sort of interchangeably, but they are very distinct, aren't they? Can you maybe give us a bit of a view of what open finance actually is?
So yeah, it's a good one. I think there's a very long-winded definition in the FCA's report, but I think simply it's not new. It's been around for a while, but I think ultimately it's around being able to access all your financial data rather than just a limited set of financial data which comes under open banking, both underpinned by regulation, but also technology and the market as well. So I think it's what it ultimately is an expansion of what we achieve in open banking to a much broader set of financial data. But I think it will be different in terms of, if we think about open banking in a very narrow sense, it was a regulatory standards-led effort, particularly in the UK, PSD2 more broadly. Open finance is a much broader concept, which will, at some point, we believe, be underpinned by regulation, but is a much broader movement, which I think will be led much more by the market as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? As you say, with PSD2 and open banking in the UK, then the momentum and the benefit that we're seeing from this in terms of the competition it's driving, the customer experience advancements that are being sort of delivered by it. I mean, that momentum is taking it into broader and broader remits, isn't it? I mean, as you said as well, the sort of ripples of PSD2. I mean, we're always amazed at 11FS. Like everywhere we go, people are looking at the standards that have been set, the approaches, the community engagement, everything that's happening, and almost adopting it globally when it's only a European regulation. So, I mean, as you said, there's different approaches that are happening globally right now. But I mean, you guys are looking at all of them. Is there one better than the other? I think I know the answer to that, but
I mean, we wouldn't go as far as to say that. I don't think there's one route to get to open finance. It's a very, very big concept encompassing lots of areas. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's a really one prescriptive route. I think what's happened in Europe has been the big groundbreaker in terms of providing that legal right to access your payments data and share it with third parties, and the liability around that, which underpinned a lot of the innovation we're seeing in Europe and a lot of the responses in different parts of the world, particularly the actions taken in the UK around the CMA order has been looked at in detail, and people are picking that up. But there's a lot of variation. So we're a US company. There's no legal framework around it per se in the US, but there's a huge amount of open finance type activity. A lot of it's been market led. There are some challenges, in terms of sometimes there can be issues around whose data is it, around who's got the access rights and things like that. And so things can be a little bit more tricky sometimes in confirming, the empowering the consumers right around it. But also, in a more prescriptive route that we've seen in Europe, it's a very narrow set of data. Open banking is just payments data. And we've had a very long journey to get there, and it excludes most of the data that people would want to share and combine to get a more holistic financial picture. And there's lots of other prescriptive parts around it, such as around secure customer authentication and things like that, which have made the journey a bit, a lot more tricky for consumers, a lot more friction in there as well. So there's not necessarily one way, one goal to get there. I think there's different versions around it. So how we get there, I think, is more of a conceptual rather than a very detailed route map.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, when you say there's sort of lessons there from open banking, I mean, as you say, the sort of balance there between the prescribed regulatory approach and more of a, like say, as is happening in the UK, the sort of more market-driven sort of consensus view in terms of, I mean, there are definitely sort of pros and cons for both of them, aren't they, in terms of opening up the market or from a consumer's perspective, the sort of leads around those things. But as a trend, this is a fantastic thing for consumers, isn't it? Regardless of how we get there, if and when we get there, and the continued opening up of data, as you say, really being the consumers in terms of what they can do with it and the power that brings to their fingertips. It feels like the dawn of a very different type of financial services.
No, absolutely. This is all about the consumer, really, and in the potential utility that they're going to gain by owning and being empowered with their own financial data, because that's whose it is. It's their data,
Mm.
and to break down these asymmetrical relationships is the core goal, to unlock a series of use cases that we won't possibly know about today.
Yeah.
We'll see finance. It's already moving away from the financial services sector into other sectors. We've seen that, but I think this will accelerate that trend.
Mm.
We'll see finance popping up in all types of places where the consumer actually is. We see what's happening. The latest product that we've got in the US around Microsoft Money, where we're sort of combining an open banking type experience in Excel. We'll see lots of things like that really take off, I think, where finance will seep out from its narrow silos to where consumers want to be.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment from Dharmesh. Hey, Dharmesh, over on LinkedIn. Why do you think the focus on openness is so heavy in finance? I mean, we haven't got open utilities or open retail, but I mean, what do you think is driving that? Is it that the banks have just been so protective over that data? I mean, rightly so in some instances, but as you said, the integration, we always talk about end-to-end journeys. People, to your point around the integration that you guys have got now with Microsoft, actually Excel is where people do this. So you want your finances in Excel. You don't want your finances and Excel. You want integrated experiences. And in the same way as with Uber, you didn't want the payment to be separate from the booking. You wanted it integrated. So is it just that banks have been almost holding data hostage for such a long period of time, and it's taken regulation to really get it to open up?
So I think it's twofold. One is technology itself and the sort of huge growth of data in totality, is that people are starting to understand the power that their data holds. I don't think people really thought about that for many years before. Data wasn't necessarily digitized. It wasn't an easy concept to bring it all together. As we move into a much more digital environment, that is achievable. The growth of APIs in financial services and beyond, and that API experience beyond financial services has understood how you can combine different data sets to get a better experience, whether it's Uber and Google Maps or whatever else it may be. So people, there's a drive towards that, and an understanding, particularly in Europe, around empowering consumers through regulation. There was a definite drive they understood the power of that, and they wanted to empower the consumer. So I think finance is a logical step to sort of move them concepts, because obviously it is so is in silos. It's compartmentalized, and so it's an opportunity to sort of break that down, I think. So it's been a more broader trend around data empowered by technology. Is why we're seeing the word open on lots of things, and we are seeing a move in utilities as well.
Yeah.
So in Australia, the consumer data right does include utilities. There's a staggered approach. I think they're looking at open banking type things first, and they'll move on to a much wider set of data. And you can see by bringing in different data sets, not just from financial services, then same concepts will grow even further. How you could get a better deal with both your utility and your financial services, then I think that's only room to grow.
Yeah, for sure. And as you say, it really puts the consumer in the driving seat in terms of the data, their data, and the access that they have to who they share it with, and where they really revoke access on this. So I mean, the impact on consumers and their the financial lives really could be really significant by the continual expansion of this, couldn't it?
No, absolutely. I think there's a few areas where we need to be cautious. I think security is key. Trust is key. People don't want to share their data if they think potentially that they're going to be some risks around that. And there's some studies on open banking from the Dutch central bank talking about potentially the reluctance to share payments data and things like that. I think this is the sort of start of a journey, and we need to be really careful to bring consumers with us.
Yeah.
That's why I think things like liability frameworks are really important around all this, because then consumers will be much more willing to sort of be empowered with their data rather than cautious. So no, I think the potential is huge. The potential to get a better deal, better products, cheaper products. bring new people into financial services through sort of financial inclusion enabling type services by using different data sets is enormous. And that we're only just starting to explore some of these issues. So no, I agree. I think the journey is going to be a good one if we can get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you say, the impact from a competitive perspective is really significant. I mean, a key part of the report, for anybody who hasn't read it, we'll distribute the link so everybody can kind of jump on and grab this in a little while. But a key part of the report is about policy considerations.
Yep.
Can you just talk a little bit about some of those fundamental points? Because I think the advice, particularly for policymakers when really thinking about rolling out open finance in the way, as you say, that the FCA have been calling for people to sort of give them their views, I think is really important, because like you say, there are lots of different considerations when doing this. It's not a switch that you flick and suddenly all these things are open and everybody has access to data. There is a lot of things to make sure that this is done in a controlled way, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this report is sort of an intro to a very big topic. So we don't go into all the detail around regulation. And for a start, I think it's too big to be too prescriptive and deeply prescriptive around regulation when we're talking about open finance. I do think that will have to come in some areas, but as a we can't set them all out here.
Yeah.
I think there's some fundamentals that we can look at. I think the first is implementing a customer data right. So guarantee consumers and businesses the right to all their personal data and an ability to share it with a third party. So really expanding that rights around PSD2 to all financial data, I think is a key one. And from there, we can work backwards on how we do it. I don't think we need to be too prescriptive around it, but we should empower consumers with that right in a similar way to how they are doing in Australia. I think that's a good place to start. I think we probably need to ensure that there's clarity around things like access, liability, and governance. Regulatory clarity in the space. When there isn't, sometimes you can fall back on things like data access agreements, and sometimes they can be uncertain for consumers. So I think we need to be sure around key factors of the regulatory environment. I think policymakers need to think about where interventions are most needed. We're talking about a very big area, from pensions to investments to insurance, and there will be lots of barriers, both regulatory and process, whether it's machine readable data, paper-based ID requirements, or other technical standards, as well as regulatory issues which might prevent an open environment. So I think an audit of the processes and interventions we need, conducted by regulators, is a great place to start. So let's pick out where the interventions are most needed and focus on them. And as I say, I think really important is liability frameworks about understanding, who's liable, the type of loss that can be, felt by consumers, and what that might mean for, compensation, or understanding what liability around that. I think is really important to ensure that this grows. And obviously, finally, I think maybe we would say this, but I think the market has to play a role in building open finance infrastructure. So whether that's technical service providers, aggregators, or intermediaries like Plaid, but we're going to be connecting a whole range of different financial services together. Having a single unified technology standard or single API across all of these is going to be tricky. I think we're going to have to look to the market to build the infrastructure to make them connections for consumers. I know, again, Australia is looking at this option around accredited intermediaries. I think if we want to get there, we will need to look at the market to build some of this infrastructure and not have everything in a very standardized, commoditized environment around technology and standards. So I think the market will play an increasing role to get there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think too heavy-handed regulation can lead to almost too much standardization. This isn't about how organizations store data, it's about how they expose data, right? So, and I think the difference between those two things is really significant. It's why most of the emphasis, I think, with open banking was on, API standards. It wasn't about database standards. There's a major difference there. And I think too heavy-handed prescription around it can lead to, banks suffer from the amount of regulation that they they deal with right now. I think almost, major restructuring of how the data is held would be almost a paralyzing thing, I think, for many sort of really big organizations. I mean, there's a few good points to that. Rita Martins has a good point over on LinkedIn, which is, Dan, from your work at the FCA, do you think financial services data is ready? Or is there a requirement, do you think, to sort of clean that data up within those companies to be in a situation where it can start to be, really useful for this movement?
So I haven't worked at the FCA. I'll just point that out. Work very closely with them, but in case anyone's listening.
Well, I think Rita definitely did say with, not for.
Okay, so, right.
Very closely rather than in, if that makes sense.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, of course. No, I think there's a long way to go. There's a lot of non-digitized, non-machine readable data out there in financial services, which will be a barrier to this. So I think that's one of the areas that companies themselves should start looking at the call for input, should start looking at the global trends and what's happening, and start to think about how they digitize their own data to get ahead of the curve, to be able to take advantage, as well as be a key player in this ecosystem, not just a passenger, which regulation happens to, and it's a big problem for you, and it's a compliance exercise. I think companies need to really think about how you embrace this and digitizing data, and ensuring access and how the right technical standards around APIs is available for when it does start to grow and consumers want to experience that, would be a great step in trying to achieve it, because it may come, and it may come without you being prepared, and that is not really what we want. So I think that would be advice to companies. But no, we're not ready today. There are parts which are definitely not as digital as they should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I guess there's a difficult reality when it came to open banking, which is all banks could have done this. All banks could have exposed APIs. They could have worked with communities in a different way. They could have put the power in the hands of the consumer when it comes to data. But there was decisions and reasons and rationale why that didn't happen. There was very few. I think BBVA are always sort of shown as one of the few examples of people who really embraced that and really moved it forward. And I guess with this, it sort of leads to a very different power dynamic within financial services, doesn't it? And that's a good thing if you're looking for change. If you're a big incumbent organization, this is sort of a continuation of quite a scary thing, because opening up when you've had 200 years of being the castle with the moat is a scary thing. And I think the impact that this can have really on, as we said, touched on a little bit earlier on, the competitive landscape probably can't be underestimated. I think it's so significant that it can change the landscape from a competitive perspective forever, really.
No, absolutely. And back onto regulation a little bit, and open banking, and why some of it hasn't worked. I think some of it's been too prescriptive, and that many banks have seen it as a compliance exercise and have done the basics and not gone beyond that. They've really defined, in terms of the data and the narrow set of accounts. They've hidden behind parts around 90-day reauth and being applied to non-payment accounts. And the process so far, although to some extent has been successful, there's a lot of challenges still out there, I think, need to be ironed out in open banking. And I think if we move towards more of a principles-based approach, where the principle is to open up the data and empower consumers, and we don't necessarily have a rigid way of getting there per se, and I think we'll have a better environment for open finance than we have for open banking, when often the connection isn't right. There's a lot more issues around the experience. So I think that is one part to look at in how we would approach open finance differently to open banking. So I agree, it's not perfect today.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. As we said, the integrated experiences, the new competitors that it comes along. I mean, it feels like me and you have worked in financial services for quite some time, but I mean, every 3 months or so, I'd say the environment, the change, the competitor. I mean, this is just getting better and better and more interesting, and ultimately better for consumers, right? So it feels like things are going in the right way.
No, absolutely. As you say, we've been in fintech for a while, and the experience it's just been getting better. So I think once you open up that data, which is tied away in silos, then the experience will only grow. So no, I'm usually positive about the future of fintech. I think concepts like this in regulation will drive it. Regulation has been seen sometimes as a barrier, but in the last few years around fintech, it's been more seen as an enabler. We've seen things around PSD2, how a new market was created and new players came, and Plaid came to Europe on the back of some of the regulations to say, look, this is a huge opportunity. This concept has been introduced by policymakers. We've seen the competition mandate at the FCA, which has driven a lot of the environment for new players to come in, whether it's regulation around peer-to-peer lending, whether it's the approach of the sandbox to bring in new concepts. Regulators can be an aid, and when it comes in and it's done right, new opportunities will become available and new services will be available to consumers. And I think this is the next step in that. Let's ensure we fix things with open banking and we provide an open financial future and the right guardrails from regulation, the opportunities for consumers for it to really grow. So no, I'm usually positive. We've seen some developments in recent years, and hopefully it will continue.
It's a weird world, right? Back office technology and regulation just got sexy. Like who would have thought it when 10 years ago? But it's definitely changing the market in a major way. Unfortunately, Dan, it's coming to the top of the hour, so we better let everybody get on with their days. But if anybody wants to catch up with the report that we've been talking about in this, if it's a bit.ly link, if you head over to bit.ly/openfinance2020, all lowercase, that's bit.ly/openfinance2020. Tell you what, rather than trying to remember that, I'll put a link in LinkedIn very shortly. Check it out. If you've got any more questions for Dan or for Adam in terms of the authors of that, then let them know, let us know, and we'll get them to them. Dan, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Where can people find out a little bit more about you and all the work that you're doing at Plaid?
So on Twitter @DanMorgan1 is a good place to see what I'm saying, and or just search for me on LinkedIn as well. Obviously Google Plaid for our webpage. But I'd just like to say, don't forget to download our latest report on open finance, and drop me a line if you want any more information around what we're doing in the space as well, and we'll sure to help.
Sounds good. All right, guys, that is all we have for you this week, but we'll be back next week with a pretty killer lineup, I have to say. Monday, we've got Ronit Ghose, who is the Global Head of Banks Research and Co-Head of FinTech at Citibank. On Tuesday, we've got Alison Harewood, who is the Head of London branch of Verengold Bank. On Wednesday, we've got Nick Cook, who is Director of Innovation Strategy and Competition at the FCA. Thursday, we've got Justin Fitzpatrick, who is the CEO over at Due Deal. And on Friday, this one's going to be weird. We've got my boss, Sean Meadows, who is the 11FS chairman. So come watch me get embarrassed and told off on Friday. It's definitely going to be entertaining, I think. So it's going to be another great week. So make sure you don't miss out on that, guys. See you same time, same place next week. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.